Hello and welcome to the New World Review, your source for everything anime and manga. And today I'm going to be sharing some final thoughts on the recently concluded Season 2 of One Punch Man. And just a very early warning, this video will contain spoilers, so continue on at your own risk. Now, One Punch Man Season 2 is a series that has garnered quite a lot of unfortunate attention, primarily due to the comparison with its first season, produced by the legendary Madhouse, whereas this season was produced by JC Staff. And right at the outset, I want to say that I did not re-watch Season 1 before going into Season 2, because I really didn't think that it would be fair to bring those kind of expectations into this experience. Regardless, there is no denying the specter of Madhouse that looms over the entirety of the 12 episodes presented here, as One Punch Man was a mega hit for the anime world. So Season 2 would have had impossible shoes to fill, even if the same production company were behind it. So with all of that in mind, how does Season 2 hold up as a product of its own? Pretty well, I'd say. It was most certainly an enjoyable 12 episodes, animated fairly well and with great vocal performances. I think one thing in particular that was simply nailed by Season 2 was comedy. There were very few intentional comic beats that failed to have me laughing, and it made me realize that this world is still so much fun to be a part of. And one thing that always gets me are the names of the various monsters, with Senti Kohai and Senti Senpai being some of my absolute favorites of this season, full credit of which goes to the original author One for having such an obscure yet direct sense of humor, as well as story. But the anime adaptation ran with it rather nicely as well. The highlight of the season for me was definitely the addition of Garo though. He was a very slow burn, like when we were first introduced to him, he seemed very bad guy for the sake of being bad guy. You know, the whole, I'm not a man, I'm a monster, so I'm just going to destroy things with no good reason. But that perception is gradually dispelled, and he becomes probably the most depth-filled character in the entire season. Through him, we explore some of the philosophy of what it is to be a hero and a monster, the former of which is also heavily focused on by all of the other heroes in One Punch Man, but Garo brings quite a nice unique spin to it, having experienced heroism from the perspective of being unjustly labeled as a monster, which goes on to become a self-fulfilling prophecy as he somewhat adopts the idea of this existence. But Garo, especially in his flashbacks, really drew attention to the darker side of heroics, with a lot of this work being done during the final episode of the series, showcasing that the most popular kid in school had the innate right to play the hero, whilst he as an outcast was relegated to the villain. And not only that, but instead of playing fairly, the hero would bring down the villain through unbalanced means, in Garo's case, by being held down by other kids. But this was also nicely reflected in one of his earlier childhood observations, where he argues that a villain, I think his name was a crab demon, was actually pretty amazing for holding his own against so many heroes, which is often something that I've thought about because generally the villains are much more impressive than the heroes, which is why they all need to team up to beat them. I mean, maybe not so much in One Punch Man because Saitama, but in most other media. Although initially I wasn't quite able to make the leap from this idea to Garo's modern day profession as a hero hunter. But when you realize that he quite purposely doesn't kill them, it does make a tinge more sense, and of course his character is made all the more complex by the fact that despite calling himself a monster, he refuses to align himself with our more traditional view of monsters. It leaves him in this wonderful grey area that made him a really captivating presence to watch on screen, and of course all of his action was fantastic, and he was just a real gem for this season in general. He's not the only one though, because I feel like the more extended cast get a huge chance to shine here, another example of which being Metal Bat, who skyrocketed to being one of my favorite characters in the entire series after I saw his episodes. He just exuded raw amazingness and really left me with a feeling of yes, this is what an S-class hero is, which is very important in this season where we are constantly questioning the very idea of heroism. Even our protagonist Saitama has to deal with it to some degree, with, as usual, his own biggest challenge being himself. But come to think of it, this season of One Punch Man really did not see a whole lot of Saitama. His primary action was becoming involved in the martial arts tournament, and yeah, he swept in and one-shot some monsters here and there as per usual, but he wasn't at all a major focus, which oddly enough I think only helps the series. The real drama and action of One Punch Man comes from people undergoing legitimate struggles, and there's only so much you can do with Saitama's struggle with boredom. So as much as I love him, I didn't really miss him all that much when he wasn't there, although it was still incredibly satisfying to see him show up and wreck face every time he was in a position to do so. And I suppose I should also mention the character of Suryu, who was an interesting addition to the world, as I did very much enjoy delving into the pursuit of strength outside of the hero profession. And Suryu provided some challenging ideas, but I really liked that when everything was said and done, even he was left crying out for a hero to help him, finally realizing what the true purpose of a hero is. However, despite these fantastic characters, I do think that Season 2 suffers from a narrative perspective. And yes, I get that this is going to happen because we're adapting a manga here, rather than specifically catering a product for seasonal television. But in the end, all that really matters is the result for me, and it was a bit jarring at times. One of the better examples is the very first episode, which focuses heavily on the character of King and his false heroic persona. Now, there was nothing wrong with this episode on its own. It presents some great ideas and it's entertaining, but it's placed in an awkward spot being the opener of the season, because I suppose that after waiting, 3 or 4 years series, what I wanted was something more Saitama or Genos focused to bring me back into this world. And so kicking things off with this in-depth exploration of King just hit me as a bit off. And once again, I get it. That's probably how it happened in the manga, but from the perspective of just watching the anime, it is what it is. But expanding our gaze, overall the season felt very incomplete. There were two major plot lines established, being Garo and the plans of the Monster Association, and by the end of the season, neither were in any way close to being resolved. For the third time, once again, I understand this is not the fault of the anime, as that was the manga material they had to develop. And while I haven't read the manga, my understanding is that by the end of season 2, we are essentially brought up to date with it, as it's currently dealing with the two aforementioned plots. That's fine, but it doesn't really change the overall feeling of this season not really having an ending. In fact, it actually feels like the halfway point of a season. You know the threat is established now and it's time to kick into serious mode to deal with it. So it left me wanting more, and not in a good way. Like well, that was a satisfying series, I certainly hope we get another, but in more of a, you just ended the story halfway through, and now I don't know if I'll ever actually get to see the end of it, because it could realistically be another 3 or 4 years before we see a third outing, if at all. So yeah, it's next to impossible for me to be satisfied with season 2 from a narrative perspective, but at the same time, like I said, it was still highly enjoyable because of the wonderful characters of this world. But now I guess we should address the animation, and here's the thing, even without comparing JC Staff to Madhouse, there were moments where what this season provides is simply lackluster. For the most part, the animation was fine and even greatly enjoyable, but there are certain segments of action that feel like they just really didn't have that much put into them. For example, in episode 2 when Saitama is fighting Fubuki, there is a point in which he sandwiches him in concrete, and the way in which he is visually depicted to break out of it is exceptionally underwhelming. It's just a basic flash of light and then some slow moving rock fragments with an even slower moving, entirely still image of Saitama. This moment is missing any semblance of oomph and impact, and it's not the only time that the action feels lacking either. There are moments like that scattered throughout the entirety of these 12 episodes that just make me want more from what I'm watching. And I have to admit some of that may be because of how fondly I remember what Madhouse did with season 1, but for the most part I do believe that these instances are just plain and simple, lesser quality animation. And that's a shame. But I guess that's what we have. Luckily, I don't feel like these instances impact the overall experience too much. Yes, they are a bit jarring, but as a whole, the animation feels, quite solid. And in the end, I did thoroughly enjoy my time with this second outing of One Punch Man. The only major detriment in my eyes was the narrative itself, but once again, just experiencing these characters once more in this world makes up for it. For me, anyway. But that pretty much does it for my final thoughts on season 2 of One Punch Man. If you enjoyed this video and the content this channel produces in general, then please do consider donating to the New World Review Patreon, because the support of all of you amazing people is what continues to make this channel possible. And if Patreon isn't quite your style, then please do leave this video a like, share, or subscribe, because it also helps support this channel an incredible amount. And if you'd like to join the fun at any time, then please do head over to my Discord server, where a wide array of shenaniganry takes place on a daily basis. And finally, please do comment with your own thoughts on One Punch Man Season 2. This has been the New World Review, and I'll see you next time.